welcome again to another episode of SacTown Talks. Today, we're glad to be joined once again by David Bowman after another exciting end of session here. David, how's it going? Thanks for joining us again.
It's good. Always good to be with you. I almost feel like I should have some sort of a VIP placard somewhere. Anytime you visit SacTown Talks more than, three? I think this is my third or fourth time now. You get VIP status. But no, It's always good to be here with you to talk politics and to kind of catch up.
Yeah, this is kind of an interesting end of session because we had like a couple retirements that I didn't even know Brian Ebert was old enough to retire.
Right, he fools most of us with his age. No, that was I would say the amount of staff retirements this year is probably the most that I've ever seen at one time. I mean, you have a combined at least 250, 300 years of service amongst 11, 12, 13 staffers. And so you lose a lot of institutional memory and staffers that have really contributed so much to the institution.
And it was crazy. You had like the same on the Senate side, like the same person on the Senate side and the Assembly side retired at the same time.
Yeah.
That wasn't coordinated.
No, at least not to my knowledge. But if I may take a moment of personal privilege, just give a huge shout out to Bernadette McNulty, who retired in the Senate. Obviously, Brian Ebert, longtime friend, longtime mentor of mine. Just institutions within the institution, a wealth of knowledge, two folks that have really kind of been there and helped me in my career in numerous aspects of my career. And so all of the other retirees as well, it's always bittersweet when you see longtime staff go because you establish and build relationships with these folks over years. And then to see them go, again, it's bittersweet. You're happy to see the fact that they've made it to a point where they can retire, but you know the institution is going to suffer a huge loss, absent their leadership and just hard work they put in every day. So, yeah.
And your job on the floor unit versus their job kind of with leadership. Can you explain how that works and kind of what the separation is?
So with the speaker's floor unit, they typically handle, and obviously they work closely with our office, right? So they coordinate motions that happen on the floor. The only thing they do that we don't necessarily have a hand in is they coordinate which bills, not only which bills are eligible to be taken up, but which bills will actually be taken up during the course of that session. Motions that are being made on the floor, if there's anything special or out of the ordinary, so to speak, that's going to happen, they coordinate with our office, Majority Leader's office, Speaker Pro Tem's office, to make sure everything runs as smoothly as possible. Obviously, there's always going to be a hiccup every now and again. And when those hiccups arise, the Speaker's floor unit is phenomenal, with our office and helping to kind of put out those fires as they come along during session, which there have been a few this year, I'll just say.
It was a pretty interesting end of session. I was watching the Senate side most of the time, but kind of once the Senate was over, kind of crazy stuff going on in the Assembly. How was it kind of end of session, and had you experienced anything like that before?
So I would say in 16 years of being in the Assembly, I have not experienced an end of session like the one we had this past year.
Which is funny because there's been like so many crazy sessions, right?
Oh, yeah. And I remember my first couple of years on the floor, you'd see things happen, particularly when we get to the last, I'd say, hour of session in the second year of session. So for listeners, the first year of our session is really bound by a joint rule, right? And so there's always this term going around, or that has floated around over the years, stop the clock and all that good stuff. It's a joint rule. So theoretically, in the past, I won't say anything present, but in the past, there have been times where you stop the clock at midnight and you can take up bills after midnight, and it's still, the day before. The second year is interesting because the second year is bound by a constitutional provision, right, which says that no bill can be passed past midnight on August 31st. And so I've seen sessions where, debate is heated. Members want to take up bills. We're waiting for the Senate to send over bills that, assembly bills back to our House that have been amended by the Senate. And so you've seen some, I would say, interesting dialogue amongst members, but never what I saw this year, which, I love it because I'm a student of parliamentary procedure. I love the procedural aspect of the process. And I love when you see motions that aren't typically made during session on the last night of session. I love it when you see procedures that aren't typical during the course of a year happen, because then it allows me to kind of, put
Right.
put my everything I've sort of studied and prepared for during the year. You got to be ready in that moment to do
Right.
your job.
Well, it was kind of, they were talking about Bernie and all the kind of stuff she'd been working on, from the blood cup
Sure.
to
Oh,
the
man.
COVID kind of researchers. And then kind of you guys had something on your side. You had the protesters.
We did, yeah. July 3rd of this year. So the day we went to summer recess, we had protests that got a bit, I would say, out of hand, in the sense that, you always want folks to exercise their First Amendment right. The difficulty with that, and what always sort of puts CHP and our sergeants in difficult situations, is what's the line, right? How do you draw a line, right? So you want people to be able to exercise their First Amendment rights, but you can't, just like I couldn't come into your house and start screaming and yelling, why I don't like your house or something that you're doing, right? I mean, there has to be a line. And so CHP is really good. Sergeants are really good about kind of allowing for demonstration, but then it reaches a point where you have to take action. And that was what happened on July 3rd.
What were they doing? Were they throwing stuff, or?
I don't recall them throwing anything. They were yelling and screaming at really, really loud. So, my backup reading clerk, Taylor Martin, did a phenomenal job. She happened to be up reading once they started yelling. I was upstairs taking a break. And when I came down, you hear all of this commotion going on. So I walk in the chamber, and she, just held it down as good as you can, given the circumstances. I jumped up shortly thereafter, and it was. I'm kind of used to tuning out extra noise,
right.
And so really, it wasn't difficult for me to just kind of get into my role. But it was a very interesting day. I got approached by a couple folks, and again, you just try to maintain a professional attitude, not necessarily engage. I've worked there long enough to know that sometimes people aren't necessarily mad at you. They're upset at the institution.
People confuse you for elected members?
Sometimes. It depends on what suit I have on. Sometimes. So there are a few times I'm walking through the hall, and that particular day, a few of the protesters approached me and had some choice words. I didn't respond. In that moment, like I said, you just kind of you take it for what it is, and you keep moving, right? And again, obviously, the reason as to why they were protesting is a very, very hot topic going on here nationwide, not just here in California. And so again, you want to respect the sensitivity that comes with the reason as to why they're here protesting in the first place, without engaging. That way you can do your job, and at the end of the day, go home. Exactly. So
this is like one of the weirdest end of sessions, because it ended on Labor Day weekend on a Saturday.
Right.
And everyone's like, have you ever remembered a session ending on Saturday? And it's because of this new law, right? Because it says August 31st is the last day you can do anything. So, so like Saturday session, Sunday session, that's going to be like a thing in the future, huh?
It could be, it could very well be. Saturday, August 31st, I woke up, drank my coffee, and just mentally tried to gear up, because historically, we're usually in session until midnight or past midnight on August 31st. And so you really just get to a place, for me, just mentally gearing up. I remember I woke up that morning and listened to a gentleman named Austin Farewell. I love to listen to classical music before busier floor sessions. It actually does relax me. And so I got up and listened to some Austin Farewell, drank my coffee, went for a 5-mile jog, and went to work.
Wow.
And didn't get home until 3 a.m.
Next day,
Right, the next day, So, and the reason we adjourned shortly after midnight, maybe closer to 1, the chief clerk's office, anytime we adjourn session, let's say we're in session for 10 hours, we're going to be there for an additional 2 or 3 hours, processing votes, making sure that every vote that was taken is recorded accurately and in the way that the member wants to have their vote recorded, where, reconciling everything that happened during the course of that session.
So how does that happen? You always see this like add-on votes, especially at the end of session when there's a couple close bills, right? Nobody wants to show their hand sometimes, so they come on afterwards. and they add on. Like, what is that process, and how long can they wait before they add on?
Yeah, it's a great question. So members have, I would say, about 10 to 15 minutes once we adjourn to be able to add on to a vote.
So once you adjourn, so the vote could take place hours and hours before.
Correct. Yeah. So members have that time, again, 10, 15 minutes. Usually it's about that time. I mean, there have been examples to where maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes. That call will come from leadership, Speaker's office, Majority Leader, Speaker Pro Tem. But generally speaking, it's about 15 minutes. And it's a process that not every legislative body across the nation has that allows members to change their vote. In California, you can change your vote so long as it doesn't affect the outcome of the vote. So in other words, if let's say a bill passed with 41 votes, and a member decided they wanted to peel off, well, they wouldn't be able to because it changes the outcome of that vote. What they can do is, perhaps find another member that's willing to go up on that bill so that they can then peel off of it. We've seen that happen several times. The process to change your vote is, so at the beginning of session, every member is given a PIN number. It's analogous to your ATM PIN number. No one has it but a member. And members will go to our vote kiosk. There's about 4 or 5 kiosks on the floor. They enter their PIN number and enter the change they want on the bill they want. That's the first step of the process. The second step of it is when they go, members will jokingly refer to this as the walk of shame, where they walk up to the speaker's rostrum and they then have to announce their vote change. So an example would be Assembly Bill 1, Assembly Member Wood, aye to no. Right, that's the second stage of that process.
So you have to do both.
Right,
you have to go to the PIN.
Yeah, PIN number.
If you go, what if you didn't vote?
If you didn't, great question. If you didn't vote, you wouldn't have to change.
Okay,
because then you're just adding on to a bill. You only have to announce it if you change your vote.
Okay,
right, meaning you voted aye the first time around, or you voted no the first time around, and now you want to change. If you're just adding on to a bill, you don't have to announce it because again, it's just an add-on. That's
the veteran move, huh?
Right. Oh yeah. I mean, I've seen in my time, members come in at the end of session, and they'll spend some time just kind of adding on instead of changing, because not just changing it at the speaker's rostrum or announcing it, I then have to announce it at the reading clerk station. So it's again 3-step process. You make the change on the kiosk. You announce the vote change at the speaker's rostrum, and then the reading clerk has to then repeat what your announcement is. So you talk about transparency and sunshine and all that good stuff. I mean, that process, and it used to be, at least from what I hear, it used to be a more complex process, complicated in many respects. We've actually really sort of improved the process by which members can change their vote. And again, I want to reiterate, not every state allows for members to change their vote. I'm not sure the practice in the Senate. My understanding is that they can't change your vote because they still vote electronically. The Assembly, they vote oral roll call versus the Assembly, we vote electronically. So it's a lot easier to make a change in our House, obviously, than the Senate, because it's not necessarily recorded. You're answering aye or no to your name in the Senate.
Why is that? Why is one electronic and one? And it's been that way for a long, long time.
So the Assembly, electronic voting was first introduced in the Assembly in 1935. And not
the
as
Senate was like, I don't know about that.
Yeah. Well, so part of the reason why we switched to a electronic roll call system was because there was a study done during that time, and what was identified was that it took 8 minutes for the reading clerk in the Assembly prior to 1935 to get through one roll call vote on a bill, right? So imagine a day where we have 150, 200 bills, and there's 8 minutes per roll call vote. We'd be there all day.
Anyone who watches the Senate can imagine something like the Senate, but twice as bad. Yeah.
Right, yeah. So the Assembly the Assembly passed an appropriation bill and spent $10,000 on the first iteration of
in 1935.
The first iteration of that electronic system. And now what you see is, instead of 8 minutes, we can get through a bill in 8 seconds, right?
How much of that 1935 system still?
Oh, none. It was. If you look at pictures, historic pictures, I don't even know whether almost like a punch card type of system. It wasn't as advanced.
Is there a rule? So like, you announce the vote.
Mhm.
Is there a time span you have to push the button? Is it just whenever the pro tem decides?
Yeah, I mean, usually it's kind of when the speaker decides to but I would say, I mean, there's no language, at least to my knowledge, in our rules, in the assembly rules, that state that the roll has to be open for 5-10 seconds. It sort of.
How many times do you have to say all those vote who desire to vote?
I think the practice has kind of been 3 in recent years. But yeah, I mean, there was a story that I've heard. I wasn't around during this time. There's a story that former Speaker Willie Brown, who was just in the Capitol a few months ago celebrating his 90th birthday, huge shout out to former Speaker Willie Brown. He's the reason I got into politics. And there was a story that in the 90s, he left the roll open for 9 hours.
Wow.
So, all those vote desire to vote, all those vote desire to vote. No, not that he said that for 9 hours, but he left the roll open for 9 hours. I'm not sure what the bill was. That story's been sort of floated out there several times. But now, to your point, about 5 to 10 seconds.
Yeah. So kind of like going back to, I guess the last night of session, in the U.S. Senate or Congress, you see this thing called like the filibuster, right? Where people can just talk, I think, forever.
Right.
You just can't stop them.
Yeah.
Is it just somebody's talking, you can't stop them?
Yeah. Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
But I guess here in California, it's up to the what are the rules on speaking members and limiting their ability to speak? And
great question. So we don't have a filibuster here in the California legislature, at least in the California Assembly. There is a parliamentary maneuver or a tool in the toolbox, so to speak, that would allow for members to sort of, I hate to say cut off debate. I don't really like to say it like that. But moving the previous question, I think it's Assembly Rule 85 or 85, 86, or 87, which basically, if let's say members are debating a bill, a member stands up, makes a motion to move the previous question. It takes 5 members that haven't spoken on the bill have to second that motion. And once 5 members have seconded the motion, goes to a vote. So majority of those present and voting. And I just want to touch on majority of those present and voting really quick, because we've received a lot of questions from staffers. What's an MPV? We hear that term a lot. What is an MPV? What's a majority of the members present and voting? Very important, because it's not just the amount of members that are present on the floor, present and voting, right? So you could have 50 members on the floor and only 20 members participate in the vote. So the vote threshold, and again, this is always going to apply to motions, never on bills. Bills are always going to be a majority vote. But yeah, majority of those present voting are the amount of members that are present on the floor and also participating in the vote. So you may see amendments. That's a good example of majority of those present voting. You may see amendments adopted with 11 votes. And, we'll have maybe members come up to the desk and like, well, hey, how's that possible? Well, it's a majority of the members present and voting, much like it would be.
Is it an electronic vote or voice vote or what?
So if it goes to a roll call vote, it would be obviously electronic. Most of the time, certain motions like, amendments are adopted without objection, right? So voice vote. In the case of moving the previous question, obviously there's probably going to be some objection to that. So it's going to go to a vote, roll call vote, electronic roll call vote, let me clarify. And again, it's the majority of those present voting. So once that motion is adopted by the body, Speaker then announces or recognizes the author on that bill. They have the option to close or not. Once they close, it goes to a vote on the bill in chief. And so when I mentioned earlier, early on in my career, you would see, sort of a lot of back and forth with members, because you had, members that would stand up and want to debate at 11:55 and, trying to rush and get through the last 10 bills of the night. And so you'd see that motion happen very regularly when I first started. Not so much anymore. I mean, you may go 3-4 sessions without seeing a motion to move the previous question, at any given time. So I would say it was more common in the 90s when the House was more closely divided. you'd see that motion happen a lot. Much like you'd see more points of orders, you'd see more parliamentary inquiries during that time. Because again, the House is more closely divided. You still see points of order and parliamentary inquiries.
Are the rules the same as they were, or
no? They get
changing?
amended. I would say they get amended every 2 years. Maybe the language isn't; they're not substantially amended, but they are. I would say languages.
Where do they come from?
So leadership, Speaker's office, Rules Committee, Chief Clerk's office, all sort of sit down and look at the rules and maybe look at where changes can be made. I do know that when the CLTA was passed in 2016, California Legislative Transparency Act, the rules were amended during that time because there was language that was added in the Constitution, more specifically in regards to the 72-hour provision on bills, things of that nature. I know that in I could be off on the year, maybe 2015, 16, 17, somewhere around there, rules were amended to allow, for instance, members to be able to introduce 50 bills instead of 40. When I first started, it was 40 bills. The rules were amended at a certain point that allows for members to introduce 50 bills per 2-year session and unlimited resolutions. When I first started, it was 5 resolutions, 40 bills. So they're amended, I wouldn't say regularly, but every 2 years, I would say there's language that is changed, added, or taken away.
What is a resolution?
Oh, man. A resolution is, it's not binding law. And we have 3 different types of resolutions in the Assembly. We have HRs, which are House resolutions, ACR, which is Assembly Concurrent Resolutions, and AJRs, which are Assembly Joint Resolutions. HRs are typically maybe the Assembly's position on a certain policy or something. And actually, a good example: our Assembly rules are adopted via HR, House Resolution 1, House Resolution 2, things of that nature. ACRs, Assembly Concurrent Resolutions, Red Ribbon Week or something like that, or you're naming maybe a portion of a highway after a fallen officer.
So it does something.
Right. It's just not binding law. Right.
Okay.
So it does something in the sense that, we're renaming this highway after maybe a fallen officer, as I mentioned, or someone prominent in the community that passed. But again, it's not binding.
Does it have to go to the Senate?
It does go to the Senate, yeah.
And does it have to go to the governor?
It does not go to the governor, no. Yeah. So that's what I mean. It's not binding law. Joint resolutions, Assembly joint resolutions typically deal with, not typically, they deal with federal matters. So it's the Assembly's sort of position on, joint resolution could be the Assembly's calling on Congress to pass immigration reform or, to pass a certain policy at the federal level. So concurrent resolutions, I talked a little bit about, voice votes and what have you. House resolutions, I would say, are typically adopted via voice vote. I mean, there are times where they go to a roll call. Concurrent resolutions are adopted via voice vote unless they appropriate money from the general fund. Right? So if, let's say, naming a freeway is going to cost money, so those resolutions have to be adopted. 41 votes, that always goes to a roll call. And joint resolutions, no matter what the language is, always have to be adopted via electronic roll call vote. So we can never take a voice vote on joint resolutions. So you'll see the chief clerk or myself, when we get to certain resolutions, kind of turn around to the presiding officer, just because it's easy to kind of, get into the habit of, this is voice vote, or because most resolutions are adopted by voice vote, right? So we'll have to sometimes turn around. It's like, hey, it's AJR, it's Assembly Joint Resolution. But yeah, right. I mean, and I've seen probably more resolutions than I can count in my time. But I mean, those are, again, the 3, and the Senate is the same. Senate Joint Resolution, Senate Concurrent Resolution. I'm not sure what their equivalent, their House resolutions would be in the Senate. I can't, maybe just an SR, Senate Resolution, something like that. Yeah, but.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of getting back to what we were talking about, but motion, what was it? A motion to remove the previous question.
Move the previous question.
So if I'm a member, not my bill, I want to talk about it. I got my mic up. I'm about to talk. I start talking. So another member can say, motion to remove the previous question.
Right.
Just even though I'm not asking a question,
right.
I could just be saying something. And that just cuts me off.
Yeah. Again, if we go to a vote, You don't see it often because I think there's sort of an understanding in the assembly. You want all members to have an opportunity to speak, right? Every member represents 468,000, if not more, constituents, close to 500,000 people. And so they're the one voice for, this many people. You want them to have a voice. I think that when I've seen it done, it's always to sort of expedite the business in the assembly.
Right.
We have several bills, and sure, if you're speaking on a bill and I raise my mic because I want to attempt to filibuster, that's just a tool in the toolbox that the majority party does have. And again, that is exercised.
So do you have to do that every bill? That motion?
I mean, you could. You could. I haven't seen it done like that. The way I've seen it applied, again, it's 11:30, 11:45. Right. And maybe you see 15 mics go up on one bill, right? And instead of rushing members to speak and get through their comments, you again utilize this tool.
Because it's interesting, like in a committee, they're like, you have 2 minutes each, or you have 1 minute each. Yeah. You ever see that, like where?
Yeah, I mean, so every member has 5 minutes to debate a bill on the floor. And actually, what's interesting is I did some research recently, and I found out I was having a conversation with Jack O'Connell, former Speaker Pro Tem, former Assembly Member, State Senator, Superintendent of Public Instruction. We were having a conversation yesterday, and give just some bit of history real quick. From 1917 to 1931, members actually had 15 minutes to speak in support or opposition to a bill. The author had 30 minutes, 15 minutes to open, 15 minutes to close on every bill. This was the practice, again, to 1931. The rules were amended in 1933, which limited the time from 15 minutes to 10 minutes. For the author, members would have 10 minutes to debate, except during the last 2 weeks of session. During the last 2 weeks of session, that debate time would be reduced to 5 minutes. And I'd also like to point out that not only could you speak for 15 minutes, you also could speak twice on a bill, right? So you could debate a bill twice during session. You have 15 minutes. Again, the author, 15 minutes to open, 15 minutes to close. And that was a practice after 1933. The 10-minute debate timer was the practice up until 1993-94 when our rules were amended that sort of ushered in the new practice that we know today. Members have 5 minutes to debate. The author has 5 minutes to open, 5 minutes to close. I bring that up because we were talking a few minutes ago about electronic voting. And, I mean, could you imagine 30 minutes to open and close on a bill, 15 minutes per member, 200 bills in a day prior to electronic voting. So 8 minutes to get through a roll call vote. That's like an all night, all weekend session. So to that point, I mean, typically when members get to about 30 seconds, so I control the debate timer at the reading clerk station.
You actually have a timer?
I do. Yeah. So it's the timer that's built into the system, right? And again, once members stand up and they're recognized by the presiding officer, I'll hit that start timer. I would say usually at around 30 seconds, the presiding officer will remind members, you have 30 seconds, please conclude your remarks. I've seen situations where the presiding officer allows sort of grace to members, especially if it's a controversial issue or it's a very personal bill or motion or something that's happening. I've seen the presiding officer be very, very lenient and give members significantly more than 5 minutes. Doesn't happen often, but usually, like I said, you get to that 30-second point, you'll hear the presiding officer 30 seconds. And again, that's just a reminder to members that at some point you got to wrap up and we got to.
So who cuts the mic off? Is that something you have the power? Or is
I don't have the power.
Who has the power?
So the sergeants have the ability, from my understanding, to cut the mics off. Presiding officer has that ability, per my understanding. But yeah, it's not done by my system. We just control the debate timer. Everything that you see that is displayed on the display board in back of me during session, we control that. We're feeding that board real-time information so members know what bills they're taking up, which motions are before the body. Any business before the body has to be displayed on that board so members know what they're voting on. And again, they know what's before the House. But no, we don't control you know, I think I'd probably feel, I don't know, I'd feel a bit odd having, the power to just kind of. So I'm
Time's
glad
up.
it's not my
Yeah.
call at all. That's
No.
not my call.
So so like you're talking about like the last day session,
Mhm.
you were listening to music, you guys are running.
Oh yeah,
So like did you know like okay, today we're gonna hear this many bills,
yeah,
like
yeah. So we typically,
this is like the time's gotta move this way, like
right,
it's gonna be close, some aren't gonna make it. Like
yeah.
do you already know that like before the day is going in?
Yes and no. So yes, in the sense that, so again, this is where the speaker's floor team is just really really critical to the process. They send out documents the night before session, sometimes the day of session, that really outline, uh, a plan for the day.
Super helpful, by the way.
Very very
Yeah.
helpful, incredibly helpful. I would not. Um, I would venture to say I wouldn't be able to do my job, but not for a lot of what they provide us, right? Because it really gives you a sense of the flow of the day. And they're just really good about communicating things that are going to happen, things that may go off, kind of off the grid. But yeah, so they'll send us documents, a pre-session document that kind of lists all of the bills that are eligible, all the bills that are a yes, meaning bills that members have agreed to take up. Which motions, if there's going to be an objection to a motion. All of that information kind of goes into the documents they send out. So it's easy to, I guess, sort of plan the day. And it's funny actually, because there's always not just staff in our office, but staff throughout the building I'll see before I get in. They're like, hey, so are we going to 9 tonight, 10 tonight, 11? Do I get to,
Yeah.
And it's just kind of, I've always just mentally prepared myself to go midnight or later, August 31st, no matter what's going on, no matter how many bills, because we didn't have a ton of bills. I think at the start of the day, we had something like maybe 75 or 80, Senate bills, maybe 200, 300 assembly bills in the Senate that still needed to come back to the assembly for concurrence. But yeah, I just always kind of mentally prepare myself.
What's the most bills you've ever taken up in one day?
Oh man. Since I would say been the reading clerk, the most that I've seen in a day is probably 269, if I recall correctly. And that was an all day, all night session.
So it's like the limit of what's possible.
Oh yeah. And I'm sure there have been times where there have been significantly more taken up. You got to remember, there hasn't always been a limit on bill introductions in the assembly. In fact, I want to say late 80s, early 90s was when that rule was first sort of brought into the assembly rules. So prior to that, members, you'd see in a 2-year session 7,500 bills introduced. Not to say all those bills make it through the process, right? But so I'm sure there have been times where there have been significantly more. That's just the most that I can think of off the top of my head. But again, those are days, and this was during COVID. So this was before I had a backup reading clerk. So, you're just up there for 6, 7, 8 hour stretch.
Pre-COVID, you didn't have a backup reading clerk.
No, well, so I started reading clerk during COVID.
Okay.
Like literally right in the beginning.
Yeah,
So
you
2020.
were the backup.
Right. I was the main and the backup. Former reading clerk Katie Lewis she had left, and so I was promoted to that role in March of 2020. And yeah, 2020,
Right,
2021, right, 2022, 2023. It's just me, So those days were a lot tougher in the sense that it's just you. So you have to do things. So, the reason I listen to classical music or get a jog in or just take time to relax before busier floor sessions is because you really have to sort of protect and take care of yourself, right? You're standing and you have to be engaged. So it's not just me standing or anyone in that role standing and sort of observing what's going on. You really have to sort of be engaged to the extent that you can, meaning you have to know what's going on at all times, what bills are being, before the body. If a member stands up and does something that another member objects to, what goes on the board, because that's what members are looking at. That's what, the chief clerk, my boss, the presiding officer in many respects, that's what everyone's looking at. That's the scoreboard, if you will, right? So you just want to do what you can to make sure you're able to do your job effectively, and you get tired, but you sleep when you get home. At least that's what I tell myself. So for me, it's really a matter of just kind of getting to a space where I'm relaxed, right? And I mentioned before in a previous episode, there's so many different conversations going on. There's so much happening during the course of a floor session. The sheer pace is really, really fast.
Yeah.
So you just you don't want to miss anything.
So I don't know. We also like on social media at some point they say we don't have enough time for everyone to talk.
Right.
We're limiting discussion.
Right.
And is that they did it through that remove the previous question?
No, so that's
how did they?
So that's separate. I mean, there have been, I have seen during my time, whether it's the speaker or the majority leader, stand up and make an announcement. Per an agreement on both sides, we're going to limit debate on bills.
Is that what happened? Both sides said, "Okay, yeah, let's just."
So you're talking about the end of session this year. Not exactly. It was slightly different. And I mean, well, yes and no. Majority leader stood up and made an announcement that, we're trying to expedite the business of the assembly. And we're going to limit debate to 30 seconds per members. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking of the time, and that was what it was. That's not to say everyone's going to be happy with that decision, but as a body, we have a certain amount of time to move these bills through the legislative process again, and that's where our office, we don't even get involved in those discussions. That doesn't come from the chief clerk. We're nonpartisan. We don't have any say so in what members. That comes from leadership, and we just kind of roll with whatever we have to roll with, right? And that sometimes is. I wouldn't say difficult at all. That just kind of comes with our job. We, the speaker and the majority party, I mean, they kind of, give us a plan as to what they want to do, and our job is to do what's asked of us, right? Implement what we can, and just kind of sit back and watch watch things play out as they do.
Right. So how much time was left in the session when they made this announcement?
I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm trying to remember, just go back a few weeks. I can't remember off the top of my head how much, what time it was. I do know right around 11 o'clock was when we really started to, just haul and try and get things done. But I can't remember specifically what time it was when that announcement was made. But
and you just had one member who just hated it, right? And was just standing up and just yelling the whole. Was he yelling for like an hour? I don't know. I just saw the social media clips. Like, what was it like in there?
I can answer it this way. I can answer it. What was it like? It's difficult. And again, this is me being my nonpartisan hat, right?
Yeah.
What was it like? Interesting is a word that comes to mind. And again, you really. So for me, I almost zone out, right? So I hear what's going on, but I'm really so focused on my job, because in that moment, what we also saw, which is something I've never experienced, was we were taking up bills at such a rapid pace, right? These are concurrence bills, meaning bills that start in the assembly, go to the Senate, they amend them, come back for concurrence, or the assembly agrees with Senate's changes.
Do you have to do an electronic vote on concurrence?
Yeah.
Every time?
Yep.
There's no voice vote option?
Nope. 100% electronic on, and
because the Senate can do that. They do like voice votes.
Correct. Yeah. Concurrence bills. I mean, debate is shorter because these bills have already been heard by the body, and so you'll hear the speaker announce or make sort of a comment like, "Hey, members,
the speaker himself,
not the speaker, the presiding officer, right? So if the speaker's up presiding, or Speaker Pro Tem Jim Wood, or Assistant Speaker Pro Tem Stephanie Nguyen, you'll hear, members will get a good chuckle out of it. They'll say something like, hey, members, we've heard these bills before. These are support, meaning Republicans and Democrats support these bills. You don't have to give a full 5-minute speech. Do members listen? Yeah, yes and no. But to your question, it was It was different. It was different from anything I've ever experienced. I love parliamentary procedure. I love the rules. I love the procedural aspect of the process. Um, but yeah, that was different. And as I mentioned, we were moving through bills so fast. So if you watch the tape, anytime the camera was on me, you'll see me up, kind of going through papers because they're taking up bills, you know, like
Yeah.
this. And I didn't have, so normally
You
I
can't even
read.
set your timer.
No, at all, right?
Yeah.
So, and then normally I read the bill titles, right? So, Assembly Bill 1 by Assembly Member Wood, an act relating to, that's
Right.
coming from the daily file, right? The relating clause is always in daily file. Unless you have a situation where we're taking up wharfs without reference to file, or in this case, we had concurrence bills and we built what's called a supplemental daily file, right? A supplemental daily file essentially is a daily file, just not in traditional daily file form.
Right.
I mean, we have
On the fly. Yeah.
right. I mean, there have been times where if we have enough time, we can sort of ask the bill room or Office of State Printing to print out an actual daily file, in terms of what we're used to it looking like. But in this case, I get a stack of papers about this thick, and members are just going through bills. So you'll see me ripping papers up, moving on to the next bill, the bill number, relating clause. So I didn't really have time to really kind of grasp what was going on. I just tried to stay in the moment because I tell folks all of the time, if I don't know what I'm doing or I appear that I don't know my job, everyone's looking at me. They don't care about what's on the board. If I can't do my job,
Right.
And so I take so much pride, as I mentioned to you before, in like preparing for those moments, even if they're unscripted and you're not necessarily ready for it. I do a lot of.
Because if anyone ever listened to this stuff before, you're like, man, this guy is just so overprepared. Like,
yeah, well,
this is why.
Right. Well, right. Yeah. But because you never, it's difficult because you never know what's going to happen. So I remember, I think the first time I came, I mentioned like you prepare for 50 different scenarios that may or may not happen. Right. You prepare for objections to certain motions. You prepare for members to object to certain bills, perhaps being passed through debate. Right. You don't prepare for protests all the time, or what we saw the end of session. Right. So it's for me, it kind of I guess in some ways catches you by surprise. I'm a professional through and through, and so I'm always going to do my job. So I guess it's really difficult to kind of get caught up in what's going on. Even with in years past, I mean, you'll see animated conversations on the floor between certain members.
Right.
You hear it, but you just, and then for me, it's like, ultimately, you hear me say it a lot, but like I said, I always have to emphasize we're nonpartisan. So we never want to give the appearance like we're for this or, for that. Like a lot of member level discussions happen between members, again, in leadership, be it Republican, Democrat. We just try and make, we're like the political referees, right?
Yeah.
So we don't necessarily get caught up in, some of the drama sometimes, right? We're there to do our job. And I want to emphasize this. We support the institution. We support the institution, and our job is to make sure that the institution, the rules are being followed. We're not partial to anyone. Our job is to make sure that every member adheres to the rules as set forth in our assembly rules, our joint rules, and the Senate rules. That's our job. And that's something that for me, I've always taken a lot of pride in. And it's cool because, again, you don't have to get sort of in these lines sometimes. I can just stand and do my job and watch everything sort of play out and just, maybe laugh about it later.
Right.
But, in those moments, you're just kind of, you're, at least for me, like I'm so zoned out and locked into my job. Sometimes I hear stuff. It's like, I'll have friends come and sit in the gallery or family and they're like, hey, you don't look up. And I'm like, well, I'm focused on what I'm doing. I have to be locked in ways that I don't think a lot of people understand sometimes, right? It's not just reading. Reading is the fun part of the job. It's all of the extra stuff that you have to know at any given moment, right? So if my boss steps away and the presiding officer is asking for information, I or someone in our office, most of the time it's myself because I'm the proximity from me and the presiding officer is so close, you have to be able to give that information with 1000% certainty. So it keeps you in this space of wanting to learn, right? Of really studying the rules and not just reading, but really studying and applying them. Um, not just our rules, our constitutional provisions and things that, sort of govern what happens in the assembly. It keeps you in this space of always wanting to learn and just to be ready for things that may be scripted or not, right? But you're prepared and you're confident. I always tell people, you trust the work you put in behind closed doors. So when those situations arise, you're not intimidated, right? You're just kind of
ready.
You're just ready to go,
So, at 12 o'clock, you have to stop.
12 o'clock, yes.
12:01, 12 o'clock.
12 o'clock, midnight. Unless, there are exemptions, right? So a bill that's a 2/3 vote, urgency clause bill can be taken up after midnight.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So a lot of, folks don't know that. But yeah, so all of the other bills that we have, midnight, we have to stop. And we actually have a timer, not the timer I use to sort of clock members, but we have an actual timer that the chief clerk, members of our staff are looking at the moment it hits midnight. Hey, we got to stop,
And were there any bills that didn't make it
to
time this year?
Yeah.
How many?
I can't think off the top of my head. I do remember we had 2 bills on call. Can't remember the numbers. I know we had 2 bills on call that, again, just eventually died. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there were assembly bills somewhere out there that didn't necessarily make it. And I'm sure there would probably be more Senate bills, perhaps, that did make it as well. But yeah, it's just that time. Again, first year session. You'll see maybe us go a little bit past, like I said, midnight, because there isn't a midnight deadline. It's just the second year, as I mentioned earlier. So yeah, I'm sure there were several bills and perhaps some authors that weren't necessarily happy that their bills didn't make it out.
So on the second year, on the 31st, you can't go past midnight.
Correct.
Constitutional.
Right.
But if it's a 2/3 vote, you can go.
You can go past midnight. Correct. Yeah.
So then this year, they announced a special session.
Yes.
So you've been doing that the last couple of weeks?
Yeah. So we had we convened Second X August 31st. Actually, was the night we convened, and had 2 committee hearings. We had floor session this past Tuesday, October 1st. A funny question I've been getting from some of my assembly colleagues in member offices are we going to have to come back? We're going to have to come back. And
it's usually our off time.
Right. Well, so keep in mind the Senate, I believe they've convened their second extraordinary session. The Senate still has to take up the bills that the Assembly passed.
And they can amend them, right? Send them back.
Right. Yeah. So that's the answer to the question. Yeah. The Senate amends the Assembly bills, then they have to come back for concurrence. And so I'm certain there's discussions out there beyond, what we do in our office that are kind of deciding that right now. But yeah, I'm all in. And then, after the second extraordinary session, we have the election coming up, November. And then after that, December 2nd, we convene our organizational session where the members come in, they get sworn in, we elect the speaker, the 3 non-member elected officers, we adopt our House rules. And then December 17th, we have the Electoral College. So, the second year of the legislative session is always a little bit busier just because first year you go to interim and, members are kind of back in their districts doing their thing. Second year, everyone's, up for reelection. And again, organizing our House, which is a big deal.
So this is the first time the 12-year members are gone, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So there's been a lot of people who've been here for 12 years.
Yeah.
Kind of what was that like? Kind of seeing these faces for so long, and saying goodbye to them.
You know what? It was difficult. Difficult because 12 years, one, is a very long time.
It goes fast.
Right? It does go fast. It goes so fast. But the reality is that you really establish. So one of the things that I've always said about working in the Capitol, one of the sheer joys of working in the Capitol is you build relationships with members that extend far beyond politics, your political beliefs, right? You get to know their families, you get to know their kids, you literally watch their children grow up right before your eyes. And so it's difficult in that respect because these are good people who've come and given 12 years, which is incredibly difficult, especially if you're a member that's not based in Sacramento. You're flying here 3-4 days a week. You're missing out on family time, children time. It's difficult, but in that same breath, again, you build these wonderful relationships, and so it is difficult to sort of see them go. The Brian Mainshines of the world, who's always been a really really good friend of mine. Him and I, I mean, we go back a ways, and so to see someone like him leaving, who I've built a really really great friendship with over the years, Kevin McCarty. Phil Ting. I mean, just you build relationships with all the members. Obviously, some you're a bit closer with, right? And so it's difficult. It's difficult to see them leave after 12 years, and like you said, it goes by so fast. You're like,
I remember when they were the babies, right? Yeah. They were the new ones, right?
But again, like I said, you literally like watch their children grow up right before your eyes, right? So you almost feel like they become like extended family in many respects. And so I just, want to give a huge shout out to all of the members that are departing, because they've all done our state a service with their service. And these are good people who come from all walks of life and who really come here to make a difference in this state. We have the greatest state in the union, in my opinion. I'm a little bit biased. And you have these incredible leaders that come, as I mentioned, from all walks of life to try and make it better for everyone. And so that's a sacrifice, that I respect, but it is tough to see him go.
Yeah.
It really is.
But what was the date you said when after the election they reconvene and vote for the speaker and all that stuff?
So December 2nd. So that's outlined in the Constitution, may be in our House rules and in the government code, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, December 2nd this year is going to be our organization.
Is there any ever discussion about the rules and like, oh, we should change rules or?
Oh yeah, all the time. Like I mentioned
during
earlier.
That December 2nd or whatever?
No, I mean, what you may see is a member of the minority party stand up and object to the rules being adopted, right? So maybe they offer up suggestions on the floor. Maybe those are conversations or discussions outside of what we see. But yeah, sure, you'll see members stand up and vote no on these rules.
But you were working here during the 2/3.
I was.
Were the rules different then because of the minority party had a little more power?
Oh yeah. I mean, they were definitely different. What rules specifically I couldn't cite off the top of my head, but you raise a good point. I was pre-Prop 25, I believe it was. 2/3 budget vote, right? Longest budget stalemate in our state's history, if I'm not mistaken, 100 days, if not more. I went the entire summer that year and didn't get paid because my bank, well, they didn't participate in the loan program.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
so,
wow.
I mean, the good thing was once they passed the budget, I get this one check and I just thought I was, I had just won the lottery or something like that, but I had to pay off credit cards and pay, all that stuff.
Man. You just go to Golden One.
I should have, right? But yeah, that was a very,
that was like the first state worker one. You got to open a whole one account,
right?
Because you're not gonna get paid all summer.
No, right? Yeah, and I mean, that was different. That was a very different time. I mean, you saw a lot more wheeling and dealing, so to speak, a lot more negotiations, and because you needed. I mean, I think the majority party at the time had 49, maybe 50 seats, and so you needed 4 Republicans to support a Democratic budget, and it's not always easy to do, right? So I remember, in fact, I told this story yesterday. July 23rd, 2009. Don't ask me how I remember that date. I was at work for 31 hours straight, and it was a budget, during budget time. And I just remember coming into work 8 o'clock that morning, didn't leave until 5 p.m. the next day. And it was a lot. But, I mean, it wasn't just that particular session. We had so many more late night sessions during that time. I mean, 15, 18, 20 hours was the norm.
I saw these staffers posting video, selfies or whatever, at midnight every night.
Right.
I was like, I remember when I worked the floor, we were at like at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. every night.
Every
like
single night. Right. For 2-3 weeks. Right. So I tell staffers now, I'm like, this is slow pitch softball in comparison. And it was even worse in the sense that you were there later in the 90s, mid to late 90s, early 2000s. That was before my time. I started end of 08, beginning of 09. And so, but I remember feeling like I lived at work. I spent more time at work than I did with, family. I didn't see folks. And I would just tell people like, hey, look, this is a blackout time for me. I don't have, I'm but that was just what it was during that time. Right. And it wasn't that we would adjourn at 2-3 in the morning. We'd adjourn at 2-3 in the morning and then have to be right back, session again, 9 o'clock the next morning. So yeah, it was brutal, but it really, really helped, I would say, me appreciate, just everything that goes. It's so funny because the longer I've been there and the longer I work in the Capitol, the more I tend to really, really appreciate, right, the opportunity to work there and to contribute in the way that I do, and to really be a part of an institution that is second to none, in the world, in my opinion. To be a part of that operation is something that I've mentioned this before. It's almost surreal, right? In many ways, 40 million people, fifth largest economy in the world, fewer than 2,500 legislative jobs throughout the state. And I'm a part of that class of folks, right? So it's honor for sure.
So when we first started, you said the session ends at midnight, but you didn't really get to leave work till 3 in the morning.
Yeah, I didn't get home till about 3:15.
So what happens between midnight and like 2:45?
Well, so once we adjourn, I sit down for about 30 minutes and really just let my blood start flowing back into my legs. But no, at that point, I'm processing all of the votes that were taken that day. We have to. So LIS is
everyone else is going out partying.
Well, not just me. I mean, members of our staff, right? So our journal team, Russell, Daniel, Veronica, our daily file folks, Creston, Taylor. We're really processing everything that's happened during the course of the day, right? So there's every motion that's being made, what bills are taken up. If members want to change their vote, as we talked about, we're processing all of that information. And just making sure that once we send our journal, our file, and all of our other publications to print, the information that's listed there, particularly, the votes, right, are recorded in the way that members want them to be recorded, right? That sometimes takes hour, 2 hours, especially, when you have 100, 200 bills.
Sometimes you'll see a member do a letter to the journal.
Mm-hmm.
How can you find those? Those aren't just on Ledge Info, right?
No, yeah. So our journal folks, our journal team, again, Russell Tomas is the minute clerk. So he runs the journal. Daniel Alvarez, Veronica Blevins are part of his team. They'll send out a template to members' offices. I think it's 50 words or less, Assembly Rule 42C, if I'm not mistaken, 50 words or less. And really it's sort of an explanation of a vote. So you asked the question earlier, if members don't make that 15, 20-minute time that they would have to change their vote, right? That's the option that's given to them, right? You can submit a letter to the journal. The journal team will send you a template of what that letter should say.
50 words or less.
50 words or less, wow. Right, yeah. And it's basically just, I intended to vote. It's hard to say what it says because I haven't seen one in so many years. But, again, that's the option. So it's not just that if you don't make it to change your vote during that time that you're just kind of out of luck. You do have the option, again, to submit a letter to the journal.
How often do you see that?
I would say a few times toward the end of session. There were maybe about 10 examples this year. And sometimes you'll see those objected to by members of both sides of the aisle, So but it is an opportunity for members to sort of clarify their intent perhaps on a bill that they voted for, that they didn't intend to vote for, or maybe this was my intent in voting for. So that gives them cover, I guess. If
is there some sort of like archives, or where can you kind of go and look at these?
So you could find them in the journal. I'd have to go and look and maybe find some examples. But yeah, they're printed in our journal. In our journal, it goes to Office of State Printing every night. Journals are printed daily
and then posted online.
Yeah, posted online. Yeah,
awesome.
Everything is all electronic in this field. And then one thing I did want to touch on while I was here before we wrapped up, we've gotten a lot of calls from, or I've gotten a lot of calls from staffers, and they ask, during this time of veto by the governor, right? Is that sort of the end of the road? The short answer is yes, but no.
Right.
Because the legislature, as you know, does have the power, if they so choose, to override a governor's veto.
Hasn't happened since 1979?
Hasn't happened 1979. There were 3 bills that were veto overridden during that time: AB 580, SB 191, and SB 90 during Jerry Brown's governorship. As you mentioned, doesn't happen often at all. It requires obviously a higher vote threshold. So it's not something that's done, but it is, always
it's 2/3 vote, right?
2/3 vote?
Yeah.
54 votes, yeah. So, I mean, it's always something that the legislature may or may not consider.
Yeah. You're like, yeah, you could do it.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you could, right? But
the speaker's office.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, that would be something that would be sort of originated in leadership offices, not the chief clerk. We would help, obviously if it came to that. I've read.
When could it have happened? Could it happen because like the session ends, right? Normally wouldn't begin until the first of next year, right?
Yeah. So the legislature
you'd have a new body.
Right.
Kind of interesting.
Right.
But it's not a new bill.
No. And
is there a time frame on
yeah,
this?
so there's 60 off the top of my head, there's 60 calendar days that the legislature could consider a veto override. It used to be, I just recently found this out, it used to be 60 legislative days, which is interesing because, a legislative
next year.
It could take
new session.
100%, right? So the rules at some point, going back to your question about the rules being changed and amended, they were amended at some point that, again, now it's just 60 calendar days. And after 60 calendar days, if the legislature does nothing, they just fall off the file and they disappear into thin air. And
this is something fun to discuss. Everybody's always like, "Oh, it's dead now," and I was like, "Well,
right, yeah." I mean, the ultimate
ever really dead?
No, right.
Here.
Unless again, those
like here's the rules, but the rules can always change.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, it happens not often. I mean, I wasn't even born in 1979, so it lets you know. And that was 3 bills that year, but in a 4 or 5 year span. I want to say there were maybe like 6 or 7 veto overrides. One of them was a line item veto. I think it was SB 191, 1979 was a line item veto. But yeah, it's always a tool in the toolbox.
Man,
right?
That's an encyclopedia. This is great.
No, I love history. I love history, and that's something that I've always taken a huge interest in, the history of the institution, some cool stories about, the institution, the legislature as it's evolved over the years, right? I love sharing those stories with staff and members and
with us here on SacTown Talks.
Right,
yeah?
yes.
Exactly.
100%. 100%.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.
Always a couple pearls of wisdom. Always learn something. And thanks for joining us. And enjoy your little break here unless it comes back for concurrence.
I'm just saying, I'm going to hold off on the
2nd.
vacation, until, we decide whether or not we're coming back to concur. But no, I always appreciate the opportunity to come and break bread with you, talk politics. It's always a privilege and appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Thanks,
cool.
David.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.